all of the slaves that are talked about, each of the different categories, the word slave really doesn't do it justice. Think more like indentured servant. There are conditions when the slaves need to be released, right?
Yeah.
So what are the conditions when a slave must be released?
It's at the every 7 years.
The Shemitah, right? And that's where the discussion begins. Is that we're really talking in this parsha about the Shemitah, right? And the Yovel, the 7-year cycle and the 50-year cycle. So Shemitah actually in Hebrew means release, and it's because the slaves are released. So when you go into slavery, it's not a permanent thing. Right? It's not you're completely exiled from the community and this is your life forever. There's conditions where when it goes away, right? This is not Botany Bay.
We can relate to that one.
It's important to understand that. Okay, so the conditions, so the Shemitah releases someone from slavery. So, for instance, if you are an Israelite and if you are in debt up to your eyeballs and you can't get out of it, this is a condition which is not good for human beings. So you can sell yourself into slavery, and it's not slavery at all. So you sell yourself into slavery, and then when the Shemitah comes around again, you're released. And your debt is considered paid in full. And now you can start over and get on with your life.
Amen.
So it depends on how big your debt is and how many years are left in the Shemitah cycle. So if you have a pretty big debt and the Shemitah cycle ends, so the Shemitah is 6 years from now, then you're going to be a slave for 6 years. And then you're done. You're out of debt. You're released with the release, the Shemitah, and you go on about your life. If there's only 3 years left until the Shemitah, guess what? You can negotiate with whoever you are indebted to, and they can accept the 3 years. Because at the end of the 3 years, when the Shemitah comes, you're released. You're released. So if he accepts your servitude between now and whenever the Shemitah comes, whatever that period of time is, that's the value they get out of you, out of your servitude. So obviously it's a much cheaper debt if there's only 1 year left until the Shemitah. And it's a much more expensive debt if there's 6 years until the Shemitah. And the same rules apply for land purchases. Okay? So it's a way to start over. Debtor's prison, although very common in the British Empire, was a trap. And in the Americas, this is one of the things that we fought against. We fought to get out of. And Australia too, from what I understand.
Yeah.
Because when you're in prison, it's very hard to work off debt.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, Rabbi Bernstein, it seems to me that it's quite a fair way to run a society, right? It's so respectful in a way, and it gives everyone that equity to be able to get another start in life, to have the servitude.
Yes, the trick is to get away from the word slave, because that's not what it means.
Yes, amen.
So as soon as we take that out of the equation, then we clear it up. Now, all kinds of interesting things happen with this arrangement. Let's say you sell yourself into servitude, and 2 years in, you fall in love with another servant. Okay? And they have already made an arrangement that they're a permanent servant. They're not going anywhere. So at the end of the Shemitah, you can declare yourself a permanent servant also. So you can get married to this other servant and live a happy life, although it's in servitude. And that's the whole process with taking the awl to your ear and all of that stuff.
Oh yes, yeah, very good, very good.
That's great. Thanks. And you're right that the whole thing of looking at it as a slave compared to a servant is quite different, because the servant was treated totally different to what we picture as a slave to be treated. They had a roof over their head. They had food. They were treated with respect rather than the way that we're used to having slaves treated in our modern society.
Third world countries,
yeah, exactly. So look at slave as being a bad translation.
Yeah. So we've got a question here.
Sure.
Marie? Yeah. Oh, is it answered?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, we answered that one. Cool. So thanks for helping us out with our discussion on that. But would you like to swap across modes to Pirkei Avot now?
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah? Cool, thanks.
Okay, does everybody know what Pirkei Avot is?
Yes. Some people sort of nodding, yes, maybe.
Yes.
No,
maybe.
Shaking your head.
Would be good to have your interpretation, please.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Pirkei Avot is probably the first part of the Mishnah that was written down. Okay? So the Mishnah is a large section of the oral law. So why was it written down to begin with? It's oral law. Why write it down? It seems sort of like an oxymoron. And it is. So the story begins a long time ago in a country far, far away. The Romans were ruling Judea, as they did in Yeshua's time. But a couple of 100 years later, 150 years later or so, there'd been a couple of Jewish revolts. They had been put down. And so now, although there's a good deal of animosity, things are fairly quiet. Things are fairly quiet. During this period of time, the Roman presence is led by a governor. In Yeshua's time, this was Pontius Pilate. But later on, and of course, there are new governors all the time. And later on, one particular governor had a child that he sent to the most prestigious school that he could. Of course, that's the child of the Roman governor. And wealthy Jewish families sent their children there also. One very wealthy Jewish family sent their son there. His name was Yehuda. And he became friends with the son of the Roman governor. And they remained steadfast friends throughout their lives. Now, the Roman governor was called back to Rome. He took his family with him. But still, Yehuda continued to communicate with him, would write letters, They would exchange letters back and forth. They would talk about things and political issues, foreign affairs, things like that. And this son of the Roman governor rose in political power in Rome. And Judah rose in recognition amongst the sages of Israel as well. He was very learned, as was the son of the Roman governor. And they would educate each other with these letters going back and forth until finally this son of the Roman governor, through political intrigue, to the fascinating story, becomes emperor of Rome. And this emperor of Rome, who's good friend in Judea, they're continuing to advise each other. And so in Judea, actually becomes the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, the head of the Sanhedrin, the leading sage in all of Judea and all of Israel, Galilee, everything. And they're still writing letters back and forth. And the emperor of Rome is writing letters and saying, well, how would you handle this situation that I'm seeing, right? We've got a situation in France, and I'm not sure how to handle it. And Yehuda, now the Nasi, so he's called Yehuda Hanasi, would write him back and say, well, we have a tradition, and this is how you would handle it. And this happened repeatedly until the Roman emperor said, this stuff is really good. Now, the emperor of Rome, his name was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. And we know him more commonly simply as Marcus Aurelius. Have any of you seen the movie Gladiator? Is this something that everyone has seen? Yes, no, Russell Crowe?
Yep, I think most of us have seen it, yep.
So the kindly old man is Marcus Aurelius in the film. He's the father of the trouble. So Marcus Aurelius was known as the philosopher emperor, and he's getting advice from Yehuda Hanasi until finally he looks at Yehuda Hanasi through a letter and says, this stuff is so good, you need to write it down so that others can benefit from it. And so Yehuda Hanasi is sitting there thinking to himself, you know, if the Roman emperor says you need to write it down, you need to write it down. So he starts to write it down. And the first tractate that he writes down is called Pirkei Avot. And it is precisely these kinds of common sense teachings that are attributed to sages throughout the centuries. That's what's written down first. And then the rest of the Mishnah, which is sort of an outline of the oral law, is written down afterwards. But the Pirkei Avot is a completely different type of tractate from anything else anywhere in the oral law. So between Pesach and Shavuot, we study it every single year. And there's always wonderful things in it that we look at to gain insights. So that's where the Pirkei Avot comes from. And the Pirkei Avot starts with sort of an historical overview. Oops.
So this is good foundational teaching Rabbi Bernstein. We're actually going to cover some of this again in our Torah Connect Foundations group on Tuesday night. We're going to talk about the whole history of the Sanhedrin and the oral law, and not the whole, in a very high level whole history, just to get to the point where you were actually talking about now. So it's good. Thank you for that.
Sure. So there is a preamble to the Pirkei Avot, which begins, all Israel has a place in the world to come. Now, this is a very interesting thing to say. Okay. And it kind of mirrors, or Paul mirrors this in Romans chapter 11. When he's talking about things in general, and he says, in this way, all Israel will be saved. So there is an inherent idea, an inherent concept that all Israel has a place in the world to come. This is something that we need to understand, because Israel is dealt with as a nation. It's the only nation which is dealt with as a nation. All of the Gentiles are dealt with as individuals. So individuals have to be concerned with salvation. As far as Israel goes, Israel is going to be saved, or is saved. All Israel is saved, period. End of story. If you're asking about individuals relative to Israel, you've missed the point. So we don't talk about individuals being saved with regard to Israel. We just say all Israel is a place in the world to come. This is a very difficult concept to grasp, particularly if you are coming out of Christian teachings, because all of Christianity is about individuals and individual relationships with God. And so much of the Bible is not about that at all. So much of the Bible is about Israel's relationship with God, not an individual's relationship with God. So starting with this, and we recite this preamble before studying every single chapter of Pirkei Avot. So we start with the preamble, and then we look at the Pirkei Avot itself. So chapter 1 begins, Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the great assembly. Okay? So Moses received Torah at Sinai, and he transmits it to Joshua. Everybody with me? Basic scriptural stuff. Joshua passes it to the elders and the prophets. Right? Now, what happens when the prophets go away? Well, the last group of prophets, after the Babylonian exile, we had a bunch of prophets still, right? We had Ezekiel and Daniel and Haggai and Zechariah. And all of these guys during the exile formed a committee called the Anshe Knesset Agdol, the men of the Great Assembly. So the Pirkei Avot here is saying that the Torah was passed from the prophets to the men of the Great Assembly, which was composed of the prophets and other people. So it makes perfect sense. Now, the men of the Great Assembly said 3 things. Be patient in justice, raise many students, and build a fence around the Torah. Okay? Be patient in justice. What does this mean? What do you think?
Any other thoughts?
Online, in-house, what does justice?
Liam's got your hand up. Go ahead, Liam.
I think
Oh, you muted yourself.
Yeah, you muted yourself.
I think for being patient in judgment.
Justice.
Justice. I think maybe in waiting for you to be judged with justice, instead of becoming very rational, maybe be patient. And
yes, don't be impulsive.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, take your time. Think about things, right? Whenever there's if you're in the process of a court and you're the one sitting in judgment on the court, maybe you get angry. Maybe you get sad. Maybe you feel a horrendous amount of empathy. Be patient. Let the feelings subside and look at the facts. Then dole out justice. Right? There's no need to be impulsive. Right? Don't be the Queen of Hearts. Don't be taking heads off just because.
That's good, because we're all emotional. I mean, and emotions are part of our makeup, and we're all emotional beings. And as you say, we could be sad or angry or have that sudden impulse of, I just want vengeance on that person or justice to be done in my way. But allowing that emotion to settle down and then looking at the facts properly, that's such good advice for everything, not just for judges, for everyday life.
Yes. And this is one of the things that Pirkei Avot does, is it may be answering a specific question, but it does give general understandings for life, which are extremely helpful. Raise many students. Why would the Anshe Knesset Agdola say, raise many students? Right? You can use the word disciples. It means students. Why did Yeshua say raise up students?
I was just about to say, isn't that what our Rebbe said? Go
yes.
Make disciples.
Why?
Yeah, why?
Yeah, perhaps to allow the truth to not die, for that continuum.
Exactly. This goes back to the idea of all Israel being saved, okay? The one thing we have to continue to remember over and over and over, it's not about us individually. It's not about me. So I have a duty to raise up students so that they will not only understand, but they'll surpass me in understanding. That's the goal of a teacher, is so that the students will surpass me in understanding. Understand this. If I have students and they don't surpass me in understanding, they don't quite reach my level, then eventually, generations from now, the knowledge will be gone. Every generation, they lose a little bit, and they lose a little more, and they lose a little more. Eventually, it'll be gone. We want the opposite. We want it to build and build and build. So you raise up students, and you raise up students in such a way that they have a greater understanding than I do. So this is our goal. This is what Yeshua wanted. You know, raise up students from all nations. teaching them to do everything I've commanded. So we're supposed to raise up students and teach them the commandments. Not only the commandments, but how to practice them, how to do it.
That's the key, isn't it?
Why? Why? Yeah, why? Yeah, that's all in Matthew 28. And why are we to do this?
Well,
it's to establish his kingdom here on earth. It's for the sake of mitzvah.
Yes. And also because Yeshua said so.
Yeah.
Hello.
He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Is that?
He said, if you love me, keep my commandments, those that do these commandments and teach others to do them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. All of these things are said by our Rabbi Yeshua. And above all, that's the reason for doing it. So you can have all of these commandments, and if you don't have Yeshua, it's empty. Yeshua is the basis of all of it. And Yeshua did all of the commandments, and he's teaching others to do so. And here he is instructing us to do that, to teach others and to do them. Why? Because he said so. What did Yeshua do? That's what I want to do. Because he's the Mashiach. So I do what Yeshua says to do. Raise up students and teach them the commandments.
And
Pirkei Avot had it. Go ahead.
Can I throw in here and say you're doing a great job, Rabbi Bernstein? From all of us who are in the yeshiva and from everyone here, I don't want to embarrass you, but we really appreciate what you do and how you teach us, and everything you've done. So,
right. So how do you reward me? I appreciate the praise. Thank you very much.
We get you,
but the real reward is in surpassing.
Yes, we need to.
The real reward is in surpassing.
Yeah,
we
making
need
disciples.
to put into action what you have taught us. Exactly.
You bet.
Would I be able to say something in?
Mm-hmm.
Just to throw. I wanted to say it's kind of like the rabbi's work or life work, and then he is like stopping at a certain place as like a symbol, and then you're stepping on his life's work and continue walking it.
Standing on his shoulders, yes.
Yeah, I just had that.
Absolutely. It's precisely what we need, what we want. And build a fence around the Torah. That's the third thing that the Anshe Knesset Agdola said. Now, this has been misinterpreted greatly. Greatly. It does not say build fences around the Torah. It says build a fence around the Torah. What would that mean? Okay, so what's the commandment about Shabbat? In the 10 Commandments, what's the commandment about Shabbat?
You got it.
Right? What's the commandment about Shabbat in the 10 Commandments?
Don't work.
Observe the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one. Now, if you notice, right, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy.
Yep. And
right?
Yep.
And in Deuteronomy, it's different.
Okay.
What is it in Deuteronomy?
And anybody else?
Isn't it to God the Shabbat?
That's observe, right? That's the one. So what about the one in Deuteronomy?
Anyone know Deuteronomy?
Drawing a blank, I think.
Zechor et Shabbat. Remember the Sabbath day.
Okay.
right? So we've got observe or guard or protect the Sabbath day. And we have remember the Sabbath day. This is why, by the way, we light 2 candles. One is to observe and one is to remember. That's why 2 candles are lit on Friday night.
Rabbi Bernstein, is it not the
Yes.
same? Can I ask, is it not the same thing to observe and remember? In your remembrance, you are observing, or are you
It
saying...
is not the same thing.
Okay, cool. Good. Okay. We'll wait for that explanation. Yeah.
Okay. You could remember the Sabbath day and not observe it.
Fair enough. Yep.
Right? So both are vitally important. Okay. So these 2 things we're commanded to do. Observe and remember. And both of these steps, actually, this blankets all 613 commandments, because you can't observe it without remembering it. So we are really to remember and observe, or remember and protect all of the commandments. Every one of them. So how do we protect? How do we shomer et Shabbat? How do we protect the Sabbath? How do we protect the commandment?
How do we protect it?
Well, in the vernacular of this ages, we build a fence. We make sure to protect it.
I feel confused.
Doesn't mean do anything extra. It means observe. It means protect it. Observe it. Do it. Shomer et Shabbat.
We've just got a comment here from...
Rabbi Bernstein, we have a comment here.
Sure.
Yes, I'm feeling confused. And it is in regard the holiness of Shabbat. On Shabbat, you shouldn't drive, you shouldn't turn lights on, you shouldn't do any cooking, you shouldn't do any brewing, etc., etc., etc. And we are online, and we're talking about the holiness of Shabbat. I have a microphone in my hand, and you are on via cable, or via internet.
Yes.
What is the answer for that? Because I need a clarification.
Well, the premise is wrong.
Sorry, Rabbi, can you repeat that?
He said his premise is wrong.
The premise is wrong?
Yeah, say we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. Why not?
By the rabbis. Orthodox, yes.
The rabbis did not tell us anything about the internet.
So, Rabbi Bernstein, we're talking about a positive commandment to observe and guard the Shabbat as compared to a negative commandment, which is don't do, right?
Yes.
No,
No,
not really.
Okay.
No, here's the point, is that you're taking somebody's interpretation and equating it to a commandment. You're taking a minhag and you're equating it to halakha. You can't do that. It's not the same thing.
That's clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. That makes it much more clear.
Look at it this way. Why and how during the pandemic, why did the ultra-Orthodox rabbis in Israel say, yes, we have an understanding not to use electricity on Shabbat, or rather, you can use electricity, you can't turn it on and you can't turn it off. But this is a pandemic and people can't go to services. But now we have computers and we can use Zoom for services. Is that okay, or is that a violation of Shabbat? And the answer was, it's okay, because we're using it for Shabbat. We're using it to learn about Shabbat. We're using it to study on Shabbat. We're using it for services on Shabbat. And so even the ultra-Orthodox said that that's okay. So the question comes up, can I drive a car on Shabbat? The answer is, if the nearest minyan is 20 miles away, and your choice is go to the minyan and drive a car, or don't drive the car and don't go to the minyan, the answer is don't be an idiot. Drive to the minyan. Right? If that's your choices, then that's your choices. These are the problems of the Galut. My synagogue is about 20 miles away, and I drive to it every Shabbat because I have to. Otherwise, I couldn't go. When my wife Roni and I, when we visit Yerushalayim, we stay in an apartment in basically the same place every time. It's walking distance to the shul. We walk. I don't drive the car. You see, one of the things the sages teach us is it's not about rigidity. It's about protecting and remembering the Shabbat. The important thing is don't get in your car and drive to buy a falafel. Don't do that. But get in your car and get to shul. If that's the only way you can get to shul, then you get in the car and you get to shul. Right? It's not rigid rules. But it is rigid rules. It's just the rigid rules are far more generalized than you think. And part of the reasons that the arguments of the sages took on the types of logic that they did was to allow us to think things through. So there's a rigid rule. The rigid rule is don't do any work on Shabbat, right? Yes. Okay. Is that true, though? Is that a rigid rule? And the answer is yes, but, and the sages went through lots of arguments about working on Shabbat. Is there a time and a place for work on Shabbat? And the answer is of course. And Yeshua even quoted some of these arguments. If somebody's fallen down, broken a leg, they could die, they're gonna bleed to death, something. Do you heal them on Shabbat? Of course you heal them on Shabbat. That's in the Shulchan Aruch. Yes, you heal them on Shabbat. If you've got a headache from services because the rabbi wouldn't shut up, do you go to the store and buy aspirin or Tylenol or whatever? No. You know what? You can wait until after Shabbat for that.
Yeah. Excuse me. We had a discussion a few weeks ago within the Orthodox synagogue here in Gold Coast, in Selfer.
You have an Orthodox synagogue?
And the Rabbi Gurevich, Neil Gurevich.
Or is he Orthodox or is he Chabad?
He's Chabad Orthodox.
That Chabad. They're weird.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me say something.
They're not regular. They're not.
He
regular
was telling us something very unusual. He said that on Yom Kippur, the Holy Alter Rebbe, he went and light a fire and cooked food for a pregnant woman that was cold. She was sick on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. And he said, someone fell ill on Shabbat, even here in the synagogue, and there's no one, I will call the ambulance. I will get a doctor.
Of course.
So I said,
yeah, this isn't unusual. This is the teaching of the sages.
Yeah, the Torah have a commandment that is to preserve human life, and it will bypass Shabbat.
Yeah, but it doesn't bypass Shabbat. That's what I was getting to.
So you will break the holiness of Shabbat in order to call a doctor, then whatever is needed.
No, it doesn't violate Shabbat. That's my whole point.
Yeah, that's why he said doesn't. You have to do it.
Yeah, and
So
that's not a violation of Shabbat. Look at the Kohens in the temple. They're doing a lot of work. Are they cutting? Yes, they're making the offerings. They're doing a lot of cutting. They're making the offerings. Yeah. This is clearly work. Yeah. It's what we call avodat kodesh. It's holy work. Yeah. Is that in violation of Shabbat? The answer is no.
No,
it's not. You heal on the Shabbat. Of course you heal on Shabbat. So even a hard and fast rule, like don't work on Shabbat, it's got to be understood within the entire context of life.
So Rabbi, if I'm working up a sweat on a Saturday morning on a Shabbat to set up for our Torah service, even though that's classed as work,
it's holy work.
The benefit is that we can actually do we can do a Torah service, right? So
what it means is you need more shamashim. It's what it means.
Hallelujah! I love the way you say
thank you for that. Can you send a few our way? A few more. Today we have 4, and today they're all gone, unfortunately. So that's why I can't be on the screen. I'm behind the desk.
Okay, so gentlemen, it's time to step up and help your congregation. You can help with the breakdown. So the answer is yes. Yes, you can move stuff around for Shabbat. Anything that you do like that is avodat kodesh. And this is true with all of the mitzvot. Right? There are entire sections of Gemara which are centered around figuring out what to do if you've got a situation where no matter what you do, you're going to violate a commandment. What do you do? You've got 2 choices. Both of them violate a commandment. What did Yeshua say to do?
Any thoughts, anyone?
Yeshua said exactly what it says in the oral law, and that is you lead with compassion. You do the most compassionate thing to other people, and you bite the bullet and you violate the commandment. Because ultimately, by doing the act of compassion, you're not violating the commandment.
Makes sense.
Right? Yeshua's Judaism is the most compassionate religion out there. More compassionate than anything you could think of. Why? Because Yeshua was looking at that. Yeshua gave us all of this instruction and how to deal with each other because we weren't doing a good job of it.
Yeah. I think we've got Elisa Daniel with their hand up.
Sure.
Go ahead, Daniel. Elise.
Hello. I was just thinking about the working on Shabbat thing, and I was looking at the Kedusha Rabbah, and it says if you hold back your feet on account of the Sabbath from doing whatever you please on my holy day. So it's for doing what we like. It's work is considered what.
So that's Isaiah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Isaiah. That is not Torah.
Okay.
So it's Isaiah commenting on the Torah.
Yes.
That's a commentary.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, I was just thinking that might help the distinction between what's work and what's not? Like if it's work for yourself, it's more so than like if it's work for the purpose of Shabbat.
Well, there's also work for other people.
Sure.
You got a friend that's moving. You're going to go and help them. Tell them not to do it on Shabbat.
Cool. That's good. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Again, the whole thing, it's not only that we're looking at these ideas and choosing the compassionate route. A big part of this is, why are we choosing the compassionate route? The sages saw it, and our Messiah smacked us in the face with it repeatedly. This is his mission on earth, was to get us to look at each other and say, hey, we need to treat each other well. Right? We just finished Lag BaOmer. I hope everybody had a good Lag BaOmer. And in Lag BaOmer, the great plague of Rabbi Akiva's students finally ended. Some 24,000 students of his died, and only 5 were left. The leading student was the Rashbi, the great Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. And why did the 24,000 students die? Sinat Chinam, baseless hatred. Just the same reason that the Second Temple was destroyed. And this was, oh my goodness, it 60 years later. 60 years. It's nothing. I was alive 60 years ago. Can't believe I'm saying that. But it's true.
It's a generational, a bit more than a generation, isn't it? But there's always that point of every generation is one step away from degeneration, unless you actually work at bringing it up that next level, which is what you're talking about. You know, we need to build a platform for others to stand on, rather than keep them at a level that is just below us because we know more than them. We have to allow them to step up.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that's what Rabbi Akiva did, but maybe his students didn't step up to the mark as they should have.
Well, and at the end of the day, Shimon Bar Yochai kept Torah alive for the entire next generation. That's why we light a bonfire on Lag BaOmer, to celebrate him.
Yeah, and he was a student of Rabbi Akiva, so there you go.
He was the senior student of Rabbi Akiva. Yeah. Any other questions? Not immediately. Yes, immediately.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. First, why do you think that Ezra is not mentioned in the Pirkei Avot? And he was enormous, you know, he brought the law again. He's even called in the Judaism like the second Moses. So why he's not mentioned in the Pirkei Avot?
Well, I disagree with your premise. I think he is mentioned in the Pirkei Avot.
You think?
I know so.
Men of the Great Assembly.
Exactly. He was the head of the Men of the Great Assembly.
Okay.
So these things that the Men of the Great Assembly said, that's Ezra.
Okay.
So we're talking about him right now.
Okay. And the second question is regarding the Shabbat and all the halacha. Like you mentioned, so I think the problem now, we never make that difference between the Torah commandment and the Rabbanan. So
and that's not where the difference is. The difference is between halacha and minhag.
Okay, so if I drive on Shabbat, it will be from Rabbanan or it will be a minha?
Well, were the sages alive when there were automobiles?
No, of course no. So it will be a minha.
Not necessarily.
Okay. So
what's the problem with driving on Shabbat?
No. My question is, if I break the rabbinic commandment, I am breaking the Torah law. That's my question.
There are only 3 rabbinic commandments, and Shabbat is not one of them.
So that's saying no.
This is what happens when you read things and do not study them in a group, and you don't build the context. Okay, there are only 3 rabbinic commandments. Now, what is work on Shabbat? Is there a problem with driving a car on Shabbat? Well, Halakha says yes. What's the problem? Why can't you drive a car on Shabbat? What's the problem?
Yeah, the fire in the engine. That's the problem.
Okay. So you're lighting a fire in the engine. Yeah. What else?
I don't know. I think will be more, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
That's the big one. It's lighting the fire in the engine. Are you lighting the fire in the engine? Are you transferring fire in the engine?
Theoretically, no.
Yeah, that would be too technical. But my question is.
But it's not too technical, because we're allowed to transfer fire by halakha.
Yeah, but when the car is off, of course there is no fire, so you start a new fire inside the engine.
Are we, or is the fire in the battery?
Yeah. The energy is in the battery, which gets transferred into the combustion chamber where the gasoline is.
My point is, this is a very, very gray area, which is why in modern times we say it's not a problem to save somebody's life, to feed the poor, to get to synagogue. Go ahead and drive the car. Okay, but when it can be avoided, avoid driving the car. Yeah. Are you violating Shabbat by driving the car? Some will say yes, and some will say no.
So I think we've got Lewis, yeah?
Yes,
and then David, I think, had his hand up.
Yeah. When you turn on a car, you are fighting, because you get the petrol going on, and the power within the battery is static electricity accumulated. That's not a fire that's being transmitted to another fire, to lead another.
Okay,
fire.
are you making a declaration, or are you asking?
No.
Because I can make an argument in either case.
I'm telling my position. Electrically,
okay.
battery
you can have that position that make you right.
And when you turn on, you are fighting
So don't make a declaration and say this is absolutely correct. What you're doing is saying this is a gray area, and this is what I think. Okay? Because you could do both sides that way.
All right.
Right? I understand what you think. Great, that's fine. Is that absolutely halakha? No, it's not.
Yeah, I have a question, because this is my point. At the time of the Holy Assembly, in the time, there was no electricity.
That's correct.
Electricity, they were not turning it on, so who put the law of turning on and off the electricity? Because on my concern, I saw it happening in a few synagogues, the Orthodox, the rabbi turning the lights on Shabbat, hidden from the people.
It's the same. It's the same argument that I'm talking about with regard to driving a car. It's exactly the same. So if the electricity is already making the circuit from the power plant and you redirect the electricity into the house, into the lights, some people will say, that's violating Shabbat. Some people will say, no, but it's not halakha that it is. So that rabbi made the decision. He said, no, it's not violating Shabbat. Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other people say, yes, I don't want to do that. Other people will kind of straddle and they'll say, I'll do what I can to not turn on a light, but I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to tape the refrigerator light button on so that the light doesn't shut off and come on when I open the refrigerator door. I'll just let it come on when it comes on. I'm not going to go crazy with this. And again, this is much more minhag. It's not halakha.
Yeah, that's right.
That's great. Good discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Marie, were you going to?
Oh no, I just wanted to bring it back to the compassion of our rabbi, just Rabbi Yeshua, just to bring back that point that you were making, Rabbi Bernstein. It's keeping that compassion to overarch and to influence and to penetrate everything that we do. Why do you do what you do?
Yep. Yeah.
I think David,
this actually extended even further with the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees had a big argument with the Sadducees, even during Yeshua's time. The Sadducees were actually saying, you can't even have fire in your home on Shabbat. That they were saying that violates Shabbat, even have fire in your home. So on Shabbat, in the middle of winter, they would sit in the cold and in the dark on Shabbat in their homes. And the Pharisees said, no, this makes no sense. Doesn't say anywhere that you can't transfer fire. So you can transfer fire. So you light a pilot light or a candle or something so you can light the stove. There's things you can do to do this. And out of that understanding, there came a minhag, a tradition for Jews all over the world that for Saturday afternoon, they would make a hot dish, a hot food for Saturday afternoon to eat. So Friday before sundown, you would make a big pot of food, put it in the oven, seal the oven. And so Saturday afternoon, you could open it up and you had a hot meal. All kinds of different foods were done this way. It was called chamin, or the hot dish. In Eastern Europe, we had a delicious one called chont. And in chont, it was a piece of meat and a bone with marrow and barley and beans and potatoes and onions and carrots. And it was just this big casserole thing. And you would pull it out on Shabbat afternoon and it was hot and delicious. It was something to look forward to every Shabbat afternoon. I had friends from Morocco. They had chamin, completely different. It wasn't chont. It was called dafina. And dafina was couscous. And it had hunks of lamb in it and almonds and raisins and chopped up apricots.
Stop it.
It was absolutely delicious. Same thing. They'd put it in the oven. They'd seal up the oven. Shabbat afternoon, they'd open the oven and everybody would have this hot couscous for lunch. Really nice. So there's a difference between minhag and the halakha.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Rabbi. That's really clear now.
David, you had your hand up before. Your question answered now, or did you want to comment?
I just, the chaunt idea that, hi, Rabbi Bernstein, how are you? Yeah, I love, you made me remember in the army, we used to get chaunt every Shabbat, and we used to have whole eggs. We used to have whole eggs in it, which was
whole egg in it, yeah.
Yeah, which was, I mean, I loved it, but I'm vegan now, so I don't eat it, but I still love eggs. But a question sort of with what we're talking about, like, does this come back to our understanding of, like, we started off Pirkei Avot with a fence around the Torah, and then we also talking about malacha, but in English we say work, but it's probably not the best translation. And
right, malachat avodah, right.
Yeah, so we should be like more like what it's forbidden work on the Shabbat, because am I correct in understanding that because some people think work, oh, it's laborious, it's hard, but it's actually it's about creative work or forbidden work, all of the things that are forbidden, or the sages derived, or the forbidden work based on all the works of Beit HaMikdash. They worked,
Yes.
So
right. So in Torah, the first commandment about the building of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle, the first commandment is don't do it on Shabbat. So then it lists all of the things that needed to be done to build the Mishkan. And it's cutting and sewing and measuring, and there's 39 things.
A lot of it was creative work, wasn't it?
Sometimes it's destructive.
Okay.
Sometimes it's creative. It's the 39 malachot.
And some of it's easy, some of it's sweaty.
Some of it's easy, some of it's sweaty.
Yep.
Right. The amount of effort you put into it doesn't define the work.
Fine. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. So from these 39 things, which are very specifically, we're instructed not to do on Shabbat, that's where all of the halacha about Shabbat derives.
And isn't the debate then on even the fence around the Torah, like in Orthodox communities, the general, I guess, if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying it's more minhag, that they're saying driving a car is creative work, and it's work and it's forbidden, so we shouldn't do it. And then there's obviously the element of how
the concept of creative work is wrong.
Yeah,
you can just throw that away.
Okay.
There's a lot of minhag in the Haredi, in the ultra-Orthodox communities. That's why they wear the frock coats with the two buttons in the back, right? That's minhag. The payas, that's minhag.
But how do we submit, if we submit to the house of Israel, how do we honor that idea?
You should do the halacha. You don't have to do the minhag. Okay? But what you should do is you should abide by the standards of the community that you are part of as far as the minhag is concerned. Right? So if I was in Jerusalem and I was attending or visiting an ultra-Orthodox synagogue, I would wear the coat with the two buttons in the back. Not because I have to, because it's Shabbat, but because I'm part of the community.
Is that sort of like to fill in somewhere on certain festivals and some don't, but if that synagogue does this particular thing, you honor?
Do what's in the synagogue, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely, because it's a we. It's never a me. It's always a we.
Can I interject? David, apologies, I'm doing a Marie, but you're welcome to come in after me. I just want to bring the emphasis into the we, into the unity, into the community, into what we do together, into what we agree together. That's so powerful. And that takes away what I want, brings respect into the house of God, because we do this together in unity. It brings compassion as well. That's really powerful.
Marie, there's also something else involved with it.
Yep.
Because if we're doing our own self-study and we're going through, and you're part of a community, I will guarantee that you will find something in your studies that you think the community should be doing, and they're not doing, or you think they shouldn't be doing and they are doing.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
And here's how you solve that.
Vision.
You put on your humble cap and you say, it's okay, I'm wrong.
Fine.
You go with the community.
Okay.
You just go with the community. If you want to have a discussion, you have a discussion.
Absolutely.
But you do what the community says.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
That discussion point is really good, Rabbi Bernstein.
Amen to the discussion point. Absolutely. If you can't have that freedom to be able to bring understanding so that you do something in the spirit and in the intellectual way, you know, spirit and intellect together to bring the vision, then what have you got? You need to have both together, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I can say every single congregation that I've ever belonged to, including my own now, there are things that are being done that I don't necessarily agree with, or things that we're not doing that I don't necessarily agree with. And you know what? It's so much more important to have the community together. That's Israel. And Israel following Torah as best we can. That's the important thing. It's the we, it's not the me.